What happens when the weakest member of the pack becomes the one thing every alpha fears? This is the story of Margeret, a blind omega abandoned in frozen woods to die. But what crawled out of those shadows wasn't the broken girl they left behind. It was something far older, far darker, and utterly unstoppable. Margaret's world had always been darkness. Not the comforting kind that came with sleep or the soft embrace of night. No, hers was a permanent, suffocating void that had wrapped around her since birth. She'd never seen the sun rise over the Crescent Ridge Mountains, never watched the silver moonlight dance across the lake, never looked into the eyes of another wolf and seen anything but the reflection of her own cursed existence. But she could hear everything. Right now, she heard the crunch of boots on frozen ground, the low, cruel laughter of the wolves dragging her deeper into the dead woods, the rasp of her own breath as blood trickled from the gash above her brow, freezing against her temple before it could drip. "Keep moving, freak," snarled Dane, one of the beta enforcers. His hand clamped down on her arm hard enough to bruise, yanking her forward when she stumbled over a root she couldn't see. Margaret bit down on her lip to keep from crying out. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "Why are we even wasting time on this?" Another voice muttered, Zach, younger, but no less vicious. "Just slit her throat here and be done with it." "Alpha's orders," Dane replied coldly. "She dies beyond the border. We don't need her blood staining pack territory. Bad enough we've had to feed her useless mouth for 18 years. 18 years. 18 years of being called burden, defect, mistake. 18 years of beatings when she moved too slowly, when she couldn't see the trap they'd laid in her path, when she existed at all. The Crescent Ridge pack had never wanted her. Not when she was born without sight to a mother who died in childbirth. Not when the pack healer declared her wolf dormant, broken, unlikely to ever shift. And certainly not now, when the brutal winter had stretched on for 3 months and food had grown scarce. The Alpha Council had voted unanimously. Sacrifice the blind Omega. Let the strong survive. Margaret's bare feet, they hadn't even given her boots, were numb now, past the point of pain. She couldn't feel the cuts anymore, couldn't feel much of anything except the terrible, hollow ache in her chest. No one had spoken for her. Not one wolf had stood up and said, "She deserves to live." Even Lily, the Omega she'd once considered a friend, had looked away when they'd come for her. "This is far enough," Dane announced suddenly. Margaret's heart lurched. She could smell it now, the shift in the air, the way the scent of the pack territory faded behind them. They were beyond the border. In the lawless dead zone between territories where rogues roamed and ancient things slept. Where wolves came to die. "On your knees," Dane commanded. Margaret's legs gave out before she could comply. She collapsed onto the frozen ground, her hands sinking into snow so cold it burned. She heard the metallic slide of a blade being drawn. "Wait," Zach said, and there was something ugly in his voice. "Let's make this fun." "What are you?" "Let the rogues have her," Zach interrupted, his tone light, almost playful. "Let her hear them coming. Let her know exactly what's about to rip her apart. Poetic, don't you think? The blind girl dies in the dark." Dane's laugh was low and merciless. "You're twisted, Zach. I like it." "No," Margaret whispered, the word cracking as it left her throat. "Please." "Begging now." Dane crouched beside her, and she could feel his hot breath against her ear. "Should have thought about that before you were born wrong." Then she heard it. A howl. Distant, but drawing closer. Then another. And another. Rogues. Wild wolves with no pack, no loyalty, no mercy. Drawn by the scent of her blood. "Let's go," Dane said, standing abruptly. "This'll be over quick. Please." Margaret's voice broke into a sob she couldn't contain. "Don't leave me here, don't." But their footsteps were already retreating. Fading. Gone. Margaret knelt alone in the snow, her body shaking violently from cold, from terror, from the soul-deep knowledge that she was going to die here. Forgotten. Unloved. Unwanted. The howls grew louder. Closer. She could hear the padding of paws now, the low growls, the panting breaths of predators circling their prey. Margaret's hands dug into the frozen earth, her nails cracking, her fingers going numb. She wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. But what could a blind, broken Omega do against a pack of rogues? Nothing. She was nothing. You were always nothing, the voice of the Alpha echoed in her memory. Your existence is a stain on this pack's honor. The first rogue emerged from the darkness. She could feel its presence, could smell the rancid fur and dried blood. It snarled. And Margaret closed her eyes, though it made no difference, and did the only thing she had left. She prayed, not to the moon goddess who had forsaken her, not to the ancestors who had turned their backs, but to the dark, to whatever lived in the spaces between light and shadow, to the old things that existed before the packs, to the ancient forces that slept beneath the world. If anyone can hear me, she whispered into the void, her voice trembling but fierce, I offer you everything. My blood, my soul, my vengeance. Just don't let me die like this. Don't let them win. The rogue lunged, and the crimson moon broke through the clouds. Its light bathed the dead woods in a wash of deep, terrible red, the kind of red that spoke of prophecy and bloodshed and things better left buried. Margaret felt it then. A pulse. Deep in her chest, beneath her ribs, in a place she'd never known existed. Not her heart. Something other. Something that had been sleeping. Waiting. And as the rogue's jaws closed around her throat, as blood sprayed hot across the frozen ground, as her body began to shut down, it woke. The girl who was left to die in the dead woods would never be found. But the thing that walked out 3 days later, that was something else entirely. What do you think just awakened inside Margaret? Drop your theories in the comments below. I love reading your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens when she returns to the pack that betrayed her. Trust me, you're going to want to see this. 3 weeks earlier, Margaret had still believed she might have a place in the world. She'd been foolish. The Crescent Ridge pack had never been kind, but there were moments, fleeting, fragile moments, when Margaret had felt almost human, almost wolf. The memory clung to her now like a ghost, even as something far darker stirred in her veins. She remembered Lily's voice from that morning, bright and careless as spring water. Margaret, over here, I saved you a seat at breakfast. Margaret had smiled, her hands trailing along the rough wooden walls of the pack dining hall, counting steps the way she always did. 32 steps from the door to the long tables. 15 more to where Lily usually sat. But when she'd reached the bench, her hand had landed not on wood, but on something wet and sticky. Porridge. Laughter exploded around her. Did you really think she meant it? Zach's voice, dripping with mockery. Gods, you're pathetic. Margaret's face had burned as she jerked her hand back, porridge dripping from her fingers. She'd heard Lily's giggle, light, thoughtless, joining the others. It was just a joke, Lily had said, but there was no apology in her tone. Just another day of being the pack's favorite target. Margaret had learned young that her blindness made her less than nothing in the eyes of the Crescent Ridge wolves. The strong survived. The weak were tolerated at best, tormented at worst. And Margaret? She was the weakest of them all. Her mother, Elena, had died bringing her into the world, a difficult birth that the pack healer said had been cursed from the start. Her father, a low-ranking warrior named Thomas, had taken one look at his blind daughter and walked into the forest. He never came back. The pack whispered that he'd gone rogue rather than bear the shame of fathering a defective child. Margaret had been raised by the pack out of obligation, not love. Fed the scraps left after everyone else had eaten. Clothed in whatever rags the others discarded. Housed in a storage room barely big enough to lie down in. But she'd survived. She'd learned to navigate by sound and scent and touch. She'd memorized every inch of pack territory through patient, painful exploration. She'd made herself useful in small ways, mending clothes with stitches she couldn't see but could feel, preparing herbs for the healer by scent alone, carrying messages between wolves who couldn't be bothered to walk across the compound. She'd convinced herself that if she just worked hard enough, if she just proved her value, someday they might see her as more than a burden. Then the winter came. It started in late autumn, earlier and harsher than anyone expected. The first snow fell in sheets that buried the pack territory 3 feet deep. The lake froze solid. The hunting parties returned empty-handed more often than not. And the Alpha Council began to talk about sacrifices. Margeret had heard the whispers even before the official announcement. The pack's resources were finite. The weak would have to be cold so the strong could survive until spring. She'd known, somewhere deep in her bones, that they meant her. The night before they came for her, Margeret had knelt in her tiny room and prayed to the moon goddess for the first time in years. Please, she'd whispered into the darkness. Please let me shift. Let my wolf come. Let me be strong enough to survive. But the moon goddess, if she was even listening, had remained silent. Margaret's wolf had never emerged. Not during her first shift ceremony at 13, when every other adolescent had transformed amid howls of celebration while she'd remained achingly, humiliatingly human. Not during the years since, despite the healer's potions and the elder's rituals and her own desperate prayers. Some wolves were born broken. Margeret was one of them. When Alpha Cade himself had appeared at her door the next morning, flanked by Dane and Zack, she'd known it was over. The council has decided, Cade had said, his voice cold and formal. He was a massive man, built like a mountain, with eyes like chips of ice. Resources are scarce. The pack cannot afford dead weight. You will be taken beyond the border tonight. Alpha, please, Margeret had started, but he'd cut her off with a gesture she couldn't see but could feel in the sudden shift of air. This is not a discussion. You are Omega. You serve the pack's needs. Right now, the pack needs you to die. Simple. Brutal. Final. Margeret had been given no time to prepare, no chance to say goodbye to anyone, not that there was anyone to say goodbye to. They dragged her from her room before sunset, her bare feet scraping against frozen ground, her thin dress offering no protection against the bitter wind. The pack had gathered to watch her go. She'd heard their silence, heavier than any words. No one protested. No one spoke up. They simply let it happen. Even Lily, whom Margeret had foolishly considered a friend, had said nothing. As they'd hauled her past the pack gathering, Margeret had reached out with her senses one last time, trying to find one heartbeat that beat with sympathy, one scent that carried regret. Nothing. Just cold indifference. The pack had already forgotten her. And as Dane and Zack dragged her into the deadwoods, as they'd mocked her and abandoned her and left her to be torn apart by rogues, Margeret had finally understood the truth. She had never mattered. Not to the pack. Not to the moon goddess. Not to anyone. But that was before. Before the crimson moon. Before the rogue's fangs had torn into her throat. Before something ancient had heard her desperate prayer and answered with a violence that shook the very foundations of the world. Now, as Margaret's consciousness flickered in that space between death and transformation, she felt memories that weren't hers flooding through her mind. Memories of a bloodline erased from history. Of a power the Alphas had tried to destroy. Of a monster they'd thought they'd buried forever. And she understood, with terrible clarity, that the pack's greatest mistake wasn't abandoning her. It was leaving her alive long enough to awaken. The transformation began with pain. Not the clean pain of a normal shift, bones breaking and reforming in the sacred dance of wolf and human. This was something else. Something that felt like being unmade at the cellular level and rebuilt into a creature that defied nature itself. Margaret's back arched off the frozen ground, her mouth opening in a scream that never came because her vocal cords were reshaping, her lungs collapsing and expanding, her entire body becoming a battlefield between what she'd been and what she was becoming. The rogue that had lunged for her throat lay 10 feet away, its neck twisted at an impossible angle. She didn't remember killing it. The other rogues circled at a distance now, whimpering, their predatory confidence shattered by whatever they sensed emanating from her broken body. Margaret's eyes, useless, blind eyes that had seen nothing but darkness for 18 years, burned. The sensation was agonizing, like hot coals pressed directly into her skull. She clawed at her face, feeling something wet and warm streaming down her cheeks. Blood? Tears? She couldn't tell. And then, light. Not sight exactly. Not the way she understood others' experienced vision. But something other. A sense that painted the world in textures she had no words for. She could feel the rogue's life forces like heat signatures burned into her awareness. Could sense the trees around her, ancient and gnarled, their roots deep in cursed earth. Could perceive the threads of power that connected everything, pack bonds, territorial markers, the pulse of the earth itself. Her blindness hadn't been cured. It had been weaponized. Margaret's voice came out wrong, layered with harmonics that shouldn't exist in a human throat. What's happening to me? You called, child. And I answered. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. From inside her own head and from the darkness between the stars. Ancient. Feminine. Hungry. You prayed to the dark, and the dark has claimed you. Margaret tried to push herself up, but her arms gave out. Her body was still changing, still breaking and remaking itself. She could feel power flooding her veins like liquid fire, could feel something massive and terrible unfurling inside her chest where her dormant wolf should have been. This wasn't a wolf. This was something the wolves had forgotten to fear. Your bloodline was sealed centuries ago, the voice continued, and now Margaret could feel it, a presence wrapping around her consciousness like a lover's embrace. The first alphas feared what your ancestors could become. So they hunted them, slaughtered them, tried to erase them from existence. Images flashed through Margaret's mind, memories that belonged to someone else, something else. Women with eyes like hers, blank and white and powerful, standing on battlefields as alphas fell at their feet. A council of ancient wolves chaining one of these women to a stone altar, driving silver spikes through her heart while she screamed prophecies of vengeance. A bloodline cursed and buried, its power sealed away in the veins of descendants who would never know what they carried. Until the seal was broken. Until someone desperate enough, broken enough, furious enough called out to the darkness and gave it permission to return. No, Margaret gasped, even as her body continued its violent metamorphosis. I didn't know. You knew enough, the voice said, and there was satisfaction in it now. You offered me everything, Margaret. Your blood, your soul, your vengeance. I have accepted. The transformation reached its crescendo. Margaret's spine elongated, her fingers lengthened into claws that gleamed like obsidian in the crimson moonlight. Her canines extended, sharp enough to tear through steel. Her blind eyes began to glow with a soft, eerie luminescence, white as bone, bright as death. And when she finally pushed herself to her feet, the rogues fled. They scattered into the darkness, their howls of terror echoing through the dead woods, their instincts screaming that they were in the presence of an apex predator. Margaret stood alone in the snow, her breath misting in the frozen air, her new senses painting a picture of the world that was both beautiful and horrifying. She could feel the pack territory miles away, could sense the heartbeats of every wolf in Crescent Ridge, could taste their names on the air like copper on her tongue. Dane, Zach, Lily, Alpha Cade, the ones who'd abandoned her, the ones who'd left her to die. What do you want to do, child? The ancient voice purred. They cast you out. They called you worthless. They tried to erase you like your ancestors before you. Margaret's hands clenched into fists, her new claws digging into her palms. She wanted to scream. She wanted to rage. She wanted to make them suffer the way she'd suffered every day of her miserable life. But beneath the fury, beneath the pain, a small voice whispered, "Is this who you want to be? I don't know, Margaret admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Then let me show you, the presence said. Let me show you what they took from you. What you could have been. And suddenly Margaret was seeing, not with her blind eyes, but with something deeper. She saw herself as she could have been, strong, powerful, valued. She saw a life where she wasn't the pack's burden, but its protector. Where her blindness was considered a gift from the moon goddess, not a curse. She saw everything the pack had stolen from her by deciding she was worthless before she'd even had a chance to prove otherwise. The rage that flooded her then was pure and absolute. Show me, Margaret said, her voice steady now, resonant with power. Show me how to make them pay. The ancient presence laughed, a sound like bones breaking, like ice cracking, like the end of everything. Oh, child. It will be my absolute pleasure. Margaret didn't return to the pack immediately. She couldn't. For 3 days, she remained in the dead woods, learning to control the power that now thrummed through her veins like a second heartbeat. The ancient presence, she'd begun calling it the Whisper, though it had never offered a name, guided her through the transformation with patient, ruthless precision. Your body is a weapon now, the Whisper instructed on the first night, its voice curling through Margaret's mind like smoke. But weapons are useless without control. Margaret stood in a clearing, her new senses overwhelming her with information. She could feel every living thing within 100 yards, the rabbits trembling in their burrows, the owl hunting from a distant branch, the insects sleeping beneath the frozen earth. But most importantly, she could feel the bonds. Pack bonds were visible to her now, threads of silver light connecting wolves to their alpha, to their territory, to each other. She could see them stretching back toward Crescent Ridge like glowing tethers, could feel the strength of each connection, could sense the hierarchy embedded in their very structure. And she could sever them. Try it, the Whisper encouraged. Reach out to the weakest bond. The one barely holding. Margaret extended her senses, searching through the network of connections until she found it, a thin, fraying thread belonging to an elderly wolf on the outskirts of pack territory. She could feel his isolation, his loneliness, the way the pack had gradually forgotten him. She touched the bond with her consciousness. It dissolved like sugar in water. Miles away, she heard the wolf's howl of confusion and loss, the sound of someone suddenly, terrifyingly alone. Cut off from the pack mind, from the security of belonging, from everything that made him whole. Margaret gasped, pulling her power back. I didn't mean to. Didn't you? The Whisper asked, amused. You chose him because he was already dying. Because severing his bond was an act of mercy, not cruelty. You're kinder than you think, child. But Margaret didn't feel kind. She felt powerful. And that terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. By the second day, the Whisper taught her to hunt. You need to feed, it said simply. Your body has changed. It requires different sustenance now. Margaret stalked through the woods with an ease that should have been impossible for someone who'd been blind her entire life. But her new senses painted the world in such vivid detail that sight seemed almost unnecessary. She tracked a deer by the sound of its heartbeat, by the warmth of its body against the cold air, by the fierce scent it released when it sensed something predatory nearby. When she struck, it was quick and clean. Her claws pierced the deer's throat before it could flee, before it could suffer. She held the dying animal gently, feeling its life fade beneath her hands, and whispered an apology it couldn't hear. The Whisper hummed approval. You kill with respect. Your ancestors would be proud. My ancestors were monsters, Margaret said quietly, her hands still stained with blood. Weren't they? They were survivors, the Whisper corrected. In a world where alphas had all the power, your bloodline found a way to level the field. They could strip an alpha of his authority with a touch, could see through pack bonds to find traitors and weaknesses, could command loyalty without violence. That's why they were hunted. Not because they were evil, but because they were dangerous to those in power. Margaret absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. And now I'm the last one? The last of your kind, the whisper confirmed. The seal that bound your power was meant to last forever. But trauma breaks even the strongest magic. Your abandonment, your near death, your rage, it shattered the seal completely. You are what your ancestors were meant to be, unbound and unlimited. On the third day, Margeret learned the most dangerous lesson of all. She learned to hide. The pack will sense something wrong when you return, the whisper explained. They'll smell the power on you, see the change in your eyes, feel the predator you've become. You need to mask it. Margeret practiced pulling her power inward, compressing it into a tight knot at her core. It was like trying to contain a wildfire in her chest, painful, difficult, requiring every ounce of concentration she possessed. But eventually, she managed it. The glow faded from her eyes. Her claws retracted. The overwhelming aura of danger that surrounded her dimmed to something almost normal. Almost good, the whisper praised. Now you can walk among them unseen. They'll think you're still the broken Omega they abandoned. They won't realize what you've become until it's too late. Margeret stood at the edge of the dead woods, staring in the direction of Crescent Ridge territory. She could feel the pack from here, their bonds, their hierarchy, their arrogant certainty that they were safe. She could destroy them all. The thought came unbidden, seductive in its simplicity. She could walk into that territory and tear through them like paper, could make Alpha Cade kneel, could force every wolf who'd ever tormented her to suffer. But the whisper stopped her with a single word: patience. Patience? Margaret's voice was sharp with frustration. They tried to kill me. They left me to die. Why shouldn't I? Because vengeance taken in rage is sloppy, the whisper interrupted, its tone almost motherly. You want them to suffer, truly suffer? Then you need to be smart. Strategic. Make them feel safe first. Let them think you're still weak, still helpless. And then, when they've forgotten to be afraid, I remind them, Margeret finished, understanding dawning. Exactly. The whisper's satisfaction was palpable. You don't just want to hurt them. You want to break them. You want them to understand what they've lost, what they've unleashed, what their cruelty has created. That takes time. That takes patience. Margeret took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill her lungs. The whisper was right. Rushing in now would be satisfying in the moment, but it wouldn't be enough. She wanted them to fear her. She wanted them to regret every moment they'd spent making her feel worthless. She wanted them to kneel. When do I go back? Margeret asked. Tonight, the whisper said. Under the new moon, when the darkness is absolute. Return to them as a ghost, a rumor, a nightmare they're not sure is real. And then I make them pay, Margeret finished, her blind eyes gleaming with terrible purpose. The whisper's laugh echoed through her mind like a promise. Like a prophecy. Like the end of everything the Crescent Ridge pack thought they knew about power. Margeret crossed the border into Crescent Ridge territory at midnight. The new moon offered no light, no guidance, just perfect, absolute darkness. For any other wolf, it would have been disorienting. For Margeret, it was home. She moved like a whisper through the forest, her bare feet making no sound on the frozen ground. The pack's sentries never saw her coming. She slipped past them with an ease that would have been impossible 3 days ago, her power masking her scent, her presence, even the sound of her heartbeat. She was a ghost. And ghosts couldn't be caught. Margeret made her way to the pack compound, guided by memory and her new senses. Everything looked different now, not because she could see it, but because she could feel it. The hierarchy of the pack was laid bare before her awareness, each wolf's position in the social structure visible in the strength of their bond to the alpha. Alpha Cade's bond burned brightest, a thick cord of silver-gold power that connected him to every member of the pack. His authority was absolute, his will enforced through the pack bond itself. But Margeret could see the cracks. Fear. Resentment. Doubt. The harsh winter had taken its toll on more than just resources. The pack's faith in their alpha was fraying at the edges, worn thin by hunger and cold and the brutal decisions that had been made in the name of survival. Decisions like sacrificing a blind Omega girl. Margeret crouched in the shadows outside the Alpha's lodge, listening to the conversation happening within. Her enhanced hearing picked up every word with perfect clarity. Reports of something in the Deadwoods, Dane was saying, his voice tight with unease. The hunting party found tracks. Large ones. And the rogues have gone completely silent. Rogues are cowards, Alpha Cade replied dismissively. They probably killed each other fighting over scraps. That's not what worries me. This voice belonged to Nathan, the pack's head tracker. Margeret remembered him as one of the few wolves who'd never been actively cruel to her, just indifferent. The tracks don't match any wolf I've ever seen. They're wrong. Too large. Too heavy. And they lead straight to where we left the girl. Silence. Margeret felt a bitter smile curve her lips. They were afraid. They didn't know what exactly, but they sensed something had changed in the Deadwoods. Something dangerous. The girl is dead, Cade said finally, his tone brooking no argument. She was barely alive when we left her. There's no way she survived 3 days with the rogues. Whatever you found, it's unrelated. Alpha, with respect. Enough, Cade snapped. We did what was necessary for the pack's survival. I won't entertain conspiracy theories about dead Omegas coming back to haunt us. Double the sentries if it makes you feel better, but this discussion is over. Margeret heard the men file out of the lodge, their footsteps heavy with concern despite their Alpha's confidence. She waited until they'd dispersed, until the compound had settled into the deep quiet of night. Then she moved. Her target wasn't the Alpha's lodge. Not yet. She made her way to a small cabin on the outskirts of the compound, Lily's home. The Omega who'd pretended to be her friend, who'd laughed as Margeret had been humiliated, who'd said nothing when they'd dragged her away to die. Margeret slipped through the door, unlocked, because who locked doors in pack territory, and moved silently to Lily's bedside. The girl slept peacefully, her blonde hair spread across her pillow, her face relaxed and innocent in repose. Margeret stood over her, watching, feeling the rage build in her chest. It would be so easy. One touch. One severed bond. And Lily would wake up alone, cut off from the pack, drowning in isolation. Margaret's hand hovered over Lily's throat. Do it, the whisper urged. She betrayed you. Make her suffer. But Margeret hesitated. Because Lily hadn't been the one to drag her into the woods. She hadn't been the one to vote for her death. She'd just gone along with it. Passive. Complicit. But not actively malicious. Did that make her innocent? No. But did it make her deserving of the same fate as Dane or Zach or Alpha Cade? Margeret pulled her hand back. Not you, she whispered into the darkness. Not yet. But you'll remember. You'll all remember what you did. She turned to leave. And froze. Someone was watching her. Margeret spun, her senses flaring, searching for the threat. But what she found wasn't a sentry or a guard. It was a him. A male wolf stood in the doorway of Lily's cabin, his silhouette backlit by the pale glow of the compound's perimeter lights. Margeret couldn't see his face, her blindness was still absolute in that sense, but she could feel him. His bond was strange. Unlike every other wolf in the pack, his connection to Alpha Cade was thin, barely there. As if he existed on the periphery of pack society, tolerated but not truly accepted. An outsider. Like she'd been. I know you, the male said quietly, his voice a low rumble that sent an unexpected shiver down Margaret's spine. You're the girl they left in the Deadwoods. Margeret. She should have run. Should have used her power to wipe his memory, to sever his bond, to silence him before he could raise the alarm. Instead, she asked, Who are you? Ethan, he replied, stepping into the cabin. Margeret tensed, ready to strike, but he made no aggressive moves. Just stood there, studying her with an intensity she could feel even if she couldn't see it. I'm the pack's blacksmith. I try to speak for you. At the council meeting, when they voted to send you out. Margaret's breath caught. You did. Alpha Cade shut me down, Ethan continued, and there was bitterness in his voice. Said I had no right to question pack decisions when I barely qualified as pack myself. He wasn't wrong. I'm an outsider here. Always have been. Then why stay? The question escaped before Margeret could stop it. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then, because I kept hoping it would get better. That they'd accept me eventually. That I'd find a place here. He paused. I see now that was foolish. This pack doesn't accept people who are different. They just tolerate them until they become inconvenient. Margeret felt something crack in her chest, something that had nothing to do with power or vengeance. Understanding. You should go, she said softly. Before they find you talking to a ghost. You're not a ghost. Ethan took another step closer, and Margeret caught his scent, nettle and pine and something warm that made her traitorous heart skip. You're something else. Something that scares them. I can feel it. And that doesn't scare you? No, Ethan said simply. It gives me hope. Before Margeret could respond, voices echoed from outside, sentries making their rounds. Ethan moved quickly, positioning himself between Margeret and the door. Go, he whispered urgently. Out the back. I'll cover for you. Why would you? Because they were wrong about you, Ethan interrupted, his voice fierce. And I think they're about to find out just how wrong. When that happens, I want to be on the right side. Margeret stared at him, or tried to, her blind eyes finding his form through other senses. She could feel his sincerity, could sense no deception in him. Only truth. And something else. Something that terrified her more than the whisper, more than her power, more than anything. Hope. This isn't over, Margeret said as she slipped toward the back exit. I know, Ethan replied. And then, so quietly she almost missed it, I'll be waiting. Margeret vanished into the night, her mind reeling. She'd come back for vengeance. But she'd found something she never expected. An ally. And maybe, just maybe, something more. Margeret didn't see Ethan again for 2 days. She'd retreated deeper into the forest, close enough to watch the pack, but far enough to remain hidden. The whisper had been surprisingly quiet since her encounter with the blacksmith, offering no commentary, no guidance. Just silence. It unnerved her more than she wanted to admit. Why aren't you saying anything? Margeret finally asked on the second night, huddled beneath an outcropping of rock as snow began to fall. The whisper stirred, lazy and amused. Because you're conflicted, child. And conflict makes humans so deliciously unpredictable. I'm not conflicted, Margeret lied. Aren't you? You came here for vengeance. To destroy the pack that destroyed you. But now you've found someone who sees you as more than a burden. Someone who defended you when no one else would. It complicates things. Margeret pulled her knees to her chest, feeling the cold seep into her bones despite her transformation. He doesn't change what they did. No, the whisper agreed. But he changes what you're willing to do about it. That's the problem with connections, Margeret. They make you weak. They make you hesitate. Or maybe they make me human, Margeret shot back. The whisper laughed, that bone-cracking, ice-shattering sound. You're not human anymore, child. The sooner you accept that, the easier this becomes. Before Margeret could respond, her senses flared. Someone was coming. Multiple someones. She pressed herself against the rock, masking her presence as footsteps crunched through the snow nearby. Voices drifted toward her, familiar, hateful voices. Dane and Zach. Telling you, something's out here, Zach was saying, his tone edged with fear. Nathan's tracks don't lie. Something big is hunting in our territory. Then we kill it, Dane replied, but Margeret could hear the uncertainty beneath his bravado. Whatever it is, it's just an animal. We're wolves. Apex predators. Are we? Zach stopped walking and Margeret felt his fear spike. Did you hear what happened to old Marcus? The elder? What about him? Found him this morning, wandering outside the compound. Completely unresponsive. The healer says his pack bond is just gone. Severed. Like someone cut it with a knife. Silence. Then Dane's voice, lower now, touched with genuine fear. That's impossible. Pack bonds don't just disappear. Exactly. Zach's voice dropped to a whisper. Unless something out here can sever them. Unless we didn't just abandon a blind Omega in these woods. Unless we abandoned something else. You think the girl. I think we made a mistake, Zach interrupted. I think we left something alive that should have died. And now it's coming for us. Margaret's hands clenched into fists, her claws threatening to emerge. The temptation to reveal herself, to show them exactly what they'd created, was almost overwhelming. But the whisper's voice cut through her rage. Not yet. Let them stew in their fear a little longer. Fear is the best seasoning for vengeance. The two wolves moved on, their conversation fading into the distance. But Margaret's heart hammered in her chest, adrenaline and fury mixing into a potent cocktail. They knew. They didn't understand, not completely, but they knew something was wrong. And that meant time was running out. Margaret spent the rest of the night planning. If she was going to strike, it needed to be soon. Decisive. Devastating enough to make them understand what they'd done, but calculated enough to spare those who didn't deserve her wrath. Like Ethan. There you go again, the whisper sighed. Thinking about the blacksmith. He's clouding your judgment. He's the only one who spoke up for me, Margaret argued. And how lovely that is. How romantic. One wolf with a conscience in a pack of monsters. But tell me, child, where was he when they dragged you into the woods? Where was he when they voted for your death? Margaret's jaw tightened. He said he spoke against it. And was silenced, the whisper finished. He tried, and he failed. That doesn't make him a hero, Margaret. That makes him complicit through weakness. Just like Lily. Just like all of them. Stop, Margaret whispered, but the words burrowed into her mind like parasites. You want to save him because he represents what you wish they all had been. But wishing doesn't change reality. The pack is rotten, Margaret. Every single member is tainted by their silence, their acceptance, their willingness to let you die for their comfort. Ethan included. I said stop, Margaret snarled, power flaring around her like dark fire. The whisper retreated, chuckling. As you wish. But when the time comes to choose between vengeance and mercy, remember, mercy is what got you left in these woods to die. The third morning dawned gray and bitter. Margaret felt the shift in pack energy before she saw the cause. Bonds were fluctuating wildly, fear and confusion rippling through the pack mind like a stone thrown into still water. She crept closer to the compound, her senses stretched to their limit. And heard the screaming. A young wolf, barely more than a pup, was thrashing in the center of the compound, his body convulsing as other wolves tried desperately to hold him down. Margaret focused her senses on him and felt her blood run cold. His pack bond was burning. Not severed like Marcus's, but actively being destroyed from within, like an infection consuming healthy tissue. What's happening to him? Someone shouted. I don't know. The pack healer, a woman named Sarah, knelt beside the boy, her hands glowing with healing magic. But nothing she did seemed to help. His bond is being attacked by something. Some kind of curse. It's her, a voice rang out. Alpha Cade. The massive Alpha stood at the edge of the crowd, his eyes blazing with fury and fear. The blind girl. She's doing this. That's impossible, Nathan protested. She's dead. Is she? Cade's voice cracked like a whip. Marcus's bond was severed 3 nights ago. The night after we left her in the woods. Now this boy's bond is being destroyed. You're telling me that's coincidence? Margaret's heart sank. She wasn't doing this. She'd severed Marcus's bond, yes, but accidentally, as practice, learning to control her power. But this boy? She hadn't touched him. Hadn't even sensed him until this moment. Oh dear, the whisper murmured, and Margaret felt ice flood her veins at the satisfaction in its tone. Did I forget to mention? The power comes with a price, child. Your awakening didn't just give you abilities. It released something. A plague on pack bonds. A slow-acting poison that spreads through the pack mind, destroying connections from within. What? Margaret's mental voice was a shriek of horror. You said I could control it. You can control your active abilities, the whisper corrected, unbothered by her panic. Severing bonds, sensing hierarchies, commanding loyalty. But the passive effect? That's beyond anyone's control. It's the curse your ancestors carried. The reason the alphas feared them so much. Wherever you go, pack bonds wither and die. It's not fast, takes weeks, usually, but it's inevitable. You're lying, Margaret gasped, but she could feel the truth of it. Could sense the subtle wrongness now spreading through Crescent Ridge's pack bonds like rot through wood. I'm many things, child. But I don't lie. Your presence here is poison to them. Every day you stay, more bonds will fray. More wolves will suffer. Eventually, the entire pack will collapse into chaos. No hierarchy. No alpha. No connection. Just individuals, isolated and alone, easy prey for rogues and rival packs. Make it stop, Margaret demanded. I can't. Neither can you. It's the nature of what you are. What you've become. Margaret felt her world crumbling. She'd wanted vengeance, yes. Wanted them to suffer, to understand what they'd taken from her. But this? Innocents dying, pups suffering, the entire pack dissolving into madness? This wasn't justice. This was genocide. There has to be a way, Margaret whispered desperately. There has to be. A hand clamped down on her shoulder. Margaret spun, power flaring instinctively, and found herself staring into Ethan's face. He looked terrible. Eyes bloodshot, skin pale, a nasty bruise blooming along his jaw. But his grip was firm, his presence steady. You need to leave, he said urgently. Now. The alphas organizing hunting parties. They're going to sweep the entire forest. If they find you, they'll kill me, Margaret finished numbly. They should. I'm killing them without even trying. Ethan's eyes widened. What are you talking about? My power, Margaret said, her voice breaking. It's poisoning the pack bonds. That boy who's dying? It's because of me. And it won't stop. As long as I'm here, they'll keep suffering. Then leave Crescent Ridge, Ethan said immediately. Go somewhere else. Somewhere far from any pack. And what? Margaret laughed bitterly. Wander alone forever? Never get close to another wolf as long as I live? That's not a life, Ethan. That's just a different kind of death. It's better than being hunted, Ethan insisted. Margaret, please. I can buy you time, but you have to. No. The word came out flat, final. Margaret pulled away from Ethan, her mind racing. The whisper was right about one thing, she couldn't run forever. And she couldn't let innocent wolves die because of something she couldn't control. Which left only one option. She had to end this. One way or another. Tell Alpha Cade I'll meet him at dawn, Margaret said quietly. In the clearing where they left me. Tell him I'll answer for what I've done. That's suicide, Ethan hissed. He'll bring the entire pack. I know, Margaret interrupted. She turned to face him, her blind eyes glowing softly in the dim light. But it's the only way to stop this. If I surrender, if I let them kill me properly this time, maybe the curse will die with me. Maybe the bonds will heal. Maybe isn't good enough. Ethan grabbed her shoulders, his voice desperate. Margaret, you don't owe them anything. They tried to murder you. They abandoned you. Why would you sacrifice yourself for them? Because I'm not like them, Margaret said simply. I won't let innocents die just because it's convenient. Even if those innocents are part of the pack that destroyed me. She pulled free of his grip and started walking toward the deeper woods. But Ethan's voice stopped her one last time. If you do this, I'm coming with you. Margaret turned back, shock cutting through her resolve. What? You heard me. Ethan's jaw was set, his eyes blazing with determination. If you're walking into certain death, you're not doing it alone. I didn't speak up for you before. I won't make that mistake again. And for the first time since her transformation, Margaret felt tears burn in her blind eyes. Not because she was afraid, but because someone finally was willing to stand beside her. Even if it meant standing beside her at the end. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She sat beneath the stars she couldn't see but could feel, their distant light painting patterns across her enhanced senses, and tried to find peace with what she'd decided. Ethan had stayed with her despite her protests, maintaining a respectful distance, but refusing to leave. His presence was both comforting and agonizing. It reminded her of everything she'd never had: loyalty, companionship, someone who saw value in her existence. And now she was going to die, and he'd likely die with her. "You don't have to do this," Margeret said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for hours. "We've already had this conversation," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "My answer hasn't changed. You barely know me. I know enough." She heard him shift, moving closer. "I know you're willing to die to save wolves who tried to kill you. I know you have power that could destroy them all, but you're choosing mercy instead. I know you're the strongest person I've ever met, and I've spent my whole life around wolves who pride themselves on strength." Margaret's throat tightened. "Strength doesn't matter if I can't control what I am. That boy is still dying because of me." "Then we find another way," Ethan insisted. "There has to be something." "There is," the whisper interjected suddenly, making Margaret flinch. She'd thought the ancient presence had gone silent, abandoning her now that its entertainment value had run out. But it was back, its voice different now, less mocking, more contemplative. "What do you mean?" Margaret asked aloud, then realized Ethan couldn't hear the whisper. He looked at her with concern. "Margaret." She held up a hand, silencing him, focusing all her attention inward. "What are you talking about? You said the curse can't be stopped." "I said it can't be stopped by you alone," the whisper corrected. "But there is a way. A ritual. One your ancestors knew before the alphas hunted them down." Hope flared in Margaret's chest, painful and sharp. "Tell me." "The curse spreads because you're incomplete," the whisper explained. "Your power awakened, yes, but it's raw. Unbound. Like a wound that won't close, it bleeds poison into everything around you. But if you could forge a bond, a true bond, one built on choice rather than pack hierarchy, it would anchor your power. Contain it. Transform it from a curse into a gift." "What kind of bond?" Margaret demanded. The whisper's tone turned almost playful. "The oldest kind. A mate bond. Built on mutual recognition, genuine connection, freely given on both sides. That kind of bond could stabilize your power, prevent the decay from spreading further. It might even heal what damage has already been done." Margaret's heart stuttered. "A mate bond. Yes. And before you ask, yes, it has to be genuine. You can't fake it. You can't force it. It has to be real, or it won't work. Your power will know the difference." Margaret's mind raced. A mate bond. The sacred connection between wolves, the ultimate form of pack bonding. She'd never thought she'd have one, had never even hoped for one. Blind, broken Omega that she was, who would choose her? But now, she turned toward Ethan, her enhanced senses painting his form in textures of warmth and strength and stubborn loyalty. Could he? "Don't be a fool," the whisper cautioned, reading her thoughts. "A mate bond isn't something you can manufacture in a few days. It takes time, trust, genuine feeling. You barely know the blacksmith. What you're feeling now is gratitude, not love. Connection, not destiny. If you try to force a mate bond with him and fail, you'll destroy what little stability you have left." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Margaret whispered, despair crushing down on her again. "You have two choices," the whisper said quietly. 1. Surrender to the pack tomorrow as planned. Let them kill you. Hope that your death stops the curse before it destroys them completely. 2. Run. Leave Crescent Ridge tonight, get as far from pack territories as you can. The curse will stop spreading here once you're gone, though the damage already done won't heal. Find someplace isolated where you can't hurt anyone while you search for your true mate, if such a person even exists." "Those are terrible choices," Margaret said bitterly. "Welcome to power, child. It always comes with terrible choices." Margaret sat in silence, processing everything. Both options meant loss. Both meant pain. But one meant certain death, while the other meant, what? Years of isolation? Decades of searching? A lifetime of being too dangerous to get close to anyone? Margeret. Ethan's voice pulled her from her spiraling thoughts. Whatever's happening in your head right now, talk to me. We'll figure it out together. She almost laughed at that. Together. Such a simple word, but it meant everything she'd never had. And suddenly, with crystalline clarity, Margeret understood. She didn't have to choose between vengeance and mercy. She didn't have to choose between surrender and flight. There was a third option. Fight. Not against the pack, against the curse itself. Against the limitations everyone had tried to place on her. Against the destiny that said she had to be either victim or monster, with nothing in between. The whisper told me something, Margeret said slowly, turning to face Ethan fully. There's a way to stop the curse from spreading. A way to stabilize my power without dying or running. What way? Ethan leaned forward, hope flickering in his voice. A mate bond. Margeret forced the words out. A genuine, chosen mate bond would anchor my power. Stop the decay. Maybe even heal what damage has been done. Ethan went very still. A mate bond. Yes. Margeret felt heat rise in her cheeks, an absurd reaction given everything else happening, but there it was. But it has to be real. Built on actual feeling, not desperation or convenience. Which means you need time, Ethan finished, understanding dawning. Time to find someone. Time to build that connection. Time I don't have, Margeret said. That boy could die tomorrow. More could follow. Every day I stay near the pack, I'm hurting them. Then we buy you time, Ethan said decisively. We go to the Alpha tomorrow as planned, but instead of surrendering, you negotiate. Tell him what you told me, that you can stop the curse, but you need time to forge a bond. Offer to leave the territory, but stay close enough to monitor the situation. If the decay stops once you're gone, they'll know you're telling the truth. And if they refuse? If they just try to kill me? Then I stand between you and them, Ethan said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. And you do what you have to do to survive. Margeret felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been locked tight since the moment she'd been dragged into the dead woods. Trust. Not in the pack. Not in the moon goddess. Not in fate or destiny or any of the things that were supposed to protect her. But in him. In this stubborn, loyal blacksmith who barely qualified as pack himself, but was willing to risk everything for someone the pack had deemed worthless. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because I was you once. Different circumstances, but I know what it's like to be the outsider. To be tolerated but not wanted. To feel like you're one mistake away from being cast out. He paused, and Margeret felt him gathering courage for something. My mother was a rogue, he continued. She stumbled onto Crescent Ridge territory pregnant and alone. Alpha Cade's father let her stay, but only because she was useful. She'd been a blacksmith before whatever drove her from her original pack. I was born here, but I've never been truly pack. Too much rogue blood. Too much of my mother's shame. I didn't know, Margeret whispered. Not many do. I keep my head down, do my work, try not to draw attention. Ethan's voice hardened with determination. But watching them drag you out to die, watching the pack let it happen without question, it made me realize I'm done keeping my head down. I'm done letting them define what I'm worth. And I'm done standing by while they destroy people for being different. Margeret felt tears tracking down her cheeks, warm, human tears that had nothing to do with power or curses or ancient bloodlines. Just genuine emotion. Thank you, she said, her voice breaking on the words. For seeing me. For believing I'm worth saving. You are, Ethan said fiercely. And tomorrow, we make sure everyone else sees it too. They sat together in the darkness, planning. Not for surrender or flight, but for negotiation. For survival on their own terms. And as the first light of dawn began to touch the sky, Margeret felt something she hadn't felt since before the dead woods. Hope. Real, fragile, dangerous hope. The kind that could save her. Or destroy her completely. The clearing where they'd left Margeret to die looked different in daylight. Not because Margeret could see it, her blindness remained absolute in that sense, but because her enhanced senses painted it in shades of memory and power. She could feel the traces of her own blood, still staining the frozen ground. Could sense the echoes of terror and pain that had soaked into the earth 3 nights ago. Could taste the betrayal that hung in the air like smoke. Alpha Cade arrived precisely at dawn, and he didn't come alone. Margeret counted 30 wolves surrounding the clearing, warriors, enforcers, trackers. The entire pack's fighting force, arranged in a careful perimeter. They were taking no chances with whatever they thought she'd become. They were right to be afraid. Ethan stood beside her, his presence steady despite the tension radiating from the assembled wolves. She could feel their shock at seeing him here, their confusion about why the rogue-blooded blacksmith would stand with the cursed Omega. Alpha Cade stepped forward, and Margeret felt his power like a physical weight. He was massive, his alpha aura pressing down on everything around him, demanding submission. But Margeret didn't bow. Not anymore. So, Cade's voice rumbled across the clearing. The blind girl returns. I should have known the rogues would choke on you. The rogues didn't kill me, Alpha, Margeret said, her voice calm despite her racing heart. Something else did. And then brought me back as something new. We know what you are, Danes snarled from somewhere to Cade's left. A curse. A plague. You're killing the pack from within. Not intentionally, Margeret replied. But yes, my presence poisons pack bonds. It's a side effect of my awakening. One I didn't choose and can't fully control. Murmurs rippled through the assembled wolves. Fear, anger, confusion blending into a toxic mix. Then why come back? Cade demanded. Why not stay in the woods and rot? Because I'm not a monster, Margeret said quietly. Despite everything you did to me, despite being abandoned and left to die, I won't let innocent wolves suffer because of what I've become. She paused, letting that sink in. I came to negotiate. Cade's laugh was harsh and humorless. Negotiate? You have nothing to bargain with, girl. We outnumber you. We outpower you. One word from me and my wolves will tear you apart. Will they? Margaret's voice remained steady. Are you sure about that, Alpha? She let a fraction of her power slip free, just enough for them to feel it. The air around her shimmered with dark energy, her blind eyes beginning to glow with that eerie white light. And more importantly, she reached out with her senses and touched the pack bonds. Every wolf in the clearing felt it, that terrible, invasive presence brushing against the connections that made them pack. They could sense how fragile those bonds were in her presence, how easily she could sever them with barely a thought. Wolves began to whimper. Some backed away. Even Alpha Cade's power flickered for just an instant. I don't want to hurt anyone, Margeret continued, pulling her power back. But I can. With a thought, I could isolate every wolf here. Strip you of your pack bonds, leave you vulnerable and alone. I could make you feel what I felt every day of my life. Then why don't you? Zach challenged from the perimeter, trying to sound brave and failing. If you're so powerful, why not just kill us all? Because vengeance isn't justice, Margeret said simply. And because there's another way. She felt Ethan shift beside her, silently offering support. I have a proposal, Margeret continued, addressing Cade directly. I'll leave Crescent Ridge territory. Go far enough away that the decay stops spreading. But I'll stay close enough to monitor the situation. If the bonds begin to heal once I'm gone, you'll know I'm telling the truth about not wanting to harm innocents. And if they don't heal? Cade asked suspiciously. Then I'll come back and we'll find another solution. Together. Margeret paused. But there's more. I need time to forge a mate bond. It's the only way to permanently stabilize my power, to transform it from curse to gift. Once I have that anchor, I'll no longer be a threat to any pack. The clearing erupted in noise, wolves arguing, questioning, some laughing at the absurdity of a blind Omega finding a mate. But Alpha Cade raised his hand, and silence fell immediately. You expect me to believe that? Cade's voice was dangerously quiet. That you'll just leave peacefully? Find a mate? Come back healed and friendly? I expect you to be smart, Margeret countered. Right now, you have two options. 1. Try to kill me. Maybe you succeed, maybe the curse dies with me, maybe it doesn't. But you'll lose wolves in the attempt, I promise you that. 2. Accept my offer. Let me leave, see if the situation improves, and give both of us a chance to survive this. She's lying, Dane insisted. This is a trick. She just wants time to grow stronger, to come back and destroy us all. Am I? Margeret turned her head toward Dane, her glowing eyes finding him unerringly despite her blindness. Tell me, Dane, how's your bond feeling right now? Strong? Stable? Dane went silent. Because they all could feel it, the bonds were weakening by the moment, strained by Margaret's proximity. By the end of the day, more wolves would start showing symptoms. By the end of the week, the pack structure might collapse entirely. You're running out of time, Alpha, Margeret said softly. And so am I. The longer I stay near you, the worse this gets. So decide, do we part as enemies, with bloodshed and suffering on both sides? Or do we part with an agreement that gives everyone a chance to survive? Alpha Cade was silent for a long, tense moment. Margeret could feel him weighing his options, feel his alpha instincts warring with his rational mind. Kill the threat versus preserve the pack. Pride versus pragmatism. Finally, he spoke. If I agree, if I want insurance. What kind of insurance? Margeret asked warily. The blacksmith stays here. Ethan went rigid beside her. Absolutely not. Quiet, Cade snapped. Then, to Margeret, he stands with you, so he can answer for you. If you break our agreement, if you attack the pack or spread your curse further, he pays the price. That's my offer. Take it or leave it. Margaret's blood ran cold. That's not. That's fair, Cade interrupted. You want me to trust you? Prove it. Leave your ally behind as collateral. If you're telling the truth, he'll be perfectly safe. It was a trap, Margeret realized. A way to control her, to ensure she didn't become a threat. If she agreed, Ethan would be a hostage. If she refused, Cade would have justification to attack. Take the deal, the whisper urged suddenly. You can always come back for him later. Survival first, sentiment second. But Margeret wasn't listening to the whisper anymore. She was listening to her heart. And her heart said that Ethan had stood by her when no one else would. Had been willing to die beside her. Had shown her that not all wolves were cruel, that pack bonds could be built on choice and respect rather than hierarchy and fear. She couldn't abandon him. Not the way the pack had abandoned her. No, Margeret said firmly. Cade's eyes narrowed. No deal, Margeret clarified. I won't leave Ethan as your hostage. He's done nothing wrong except show me kindness. I won't repay that by making him your prisoner. Then we have nothing to discuss, Cade said coldly. Wolves. Wait. Ethan interrupted, stepping forward. I accept. What? Margeret turned toward him, shock and horror flooding through her. Ethan, no. I accept the Alpha's terms, Ethan repeated, his voice steady. He turned to Margeret, and though she couldn't see his face, she could feel the determination radiating from him. Go. Leave the territory. Find your mate. Stabilize your power. I'll be fine. You'll be a hostage, Margeret hissed. I'll be insurance, Ethan corrected. There's a difference. Margeret, this is the only way. If you refuse, people die, you, me, members of the pack. If you accept, everyone gets a chance. Listen to your friend, Cade said, satisfaction dripping from his voice. He's smarter than you. Margeret felt tears burning in her blind eyes again. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to save everyone, supposed to find a solution that didn't require sacrifice. But the world didn't work that way. It never had. How long? Margeret asked, her voice cracking. How long do I have? 1 month, Cade said. 30 days to find your mate, forge your bond, and return to prove your power is stable. If you don't return by then, or if the pack suffers any further decay. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Margeret wanted to refuse. Wanted to fight. Wanted to tear through every wolf in this clearing and drag Ethan away to safety. But that would make her exactly what they feared, a monster without conscience or control. "I'll return," Margeret said quietly, each word a promise and a threat. "In less than 30 days, I'll come back with my power bound and stable. And Ethan will walk free." "We'll see," Cade replied. Margeret turned to Ethan one last time. She reached out, her hand finding his, their fingers intertwining. "Don't do anything stupid," she whispered. "That's my line," Ethan replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice despite the fear underneath. "Go, Margeret. Find your mate. Save yourself. I'll be waiting." Margeret squeezed his hand once, then forced herself to let go. To turn away. To walk out of the clearing and into the forest beyond, each step taking her farther from the only person who'd ever chosen to stand beside her. The wolves parted to let her pass, their fear and hatred palpable. But they didn't attack. Didn't pursue. They just watched as the blind Omega disappeared into the woods, leaving behind her only ally as insurance for a promise she had no idea how to keep. And as Margeret walked, alone once more, the whisper spoke. "Now the real journey begins, child. Now you discover if you're strong enough to forge bonds in a world that's spent your entire life breaking them." Margeret didn't answer. She just kept walking, one foot in front of the other, toward an uncertain future, toward a mate she hadn't found, toward hope that felt impossibly far away. But she would find it. She had to, because Ethan's life depended on it. And Margeret refused to let anyone else sacrifice themselves for her ever again. 28 days. That's how long Margeret wandered, searching for something she wasn't even sure existed. A mate. The concept seemed absurd now that she was actively hunting for one. Mate bonds were supposed to happen naturally, a meeting of souls, an undeniable recognition, the stuff of legends and love stories. They weren't something you could force by traveling from territory to territory, desperately hoping to stumble across your destined partner. But Margeret had no choice. Ethan's life hung in the balance. She'd covered hundreds of miles in those 28 days, skirting packed territories, avoiding confrontations, following instincts she barely understood. The whisper had been surprisingly helpful, guiding her toward places where powerful wolves gathered, neutral meeting grounds, trading posts, territorial boundaries where different packs intersected. Mate bonds are stronger between powerful individuals, the whisper had explained. Your bloodline needs an anchor of equal strength. Look for wolves with dominant auras, with power that matches your own. So Margeret had looked. She'd encountered alphas and betas, warriors and enforcers. Some had been curious about the blind wolf traveling alone. Others had been hostile, sensing the wrongness in her. The way pack bonds seemed to wither slightly in her presence even when she tried to control it. None of them had been right. No spark of recognition. No pull of destiny. Just wolves, some kind, some cruel, all ultimately wrong. And now she had 2 days left. Margeret sat beside a stream in neutral territory, her enhanced senses tracking the water's flow, the small animals moving through the underbrush, the distant presence of packed territories on all sides. "I'm running out of time," she whispered into the darkness. The whisper stirred, thoughtful. "Perhaps you're looking in the wrong places." "I've been everywhere," Margeret said tiredly. "I've met dozens of wolves. Powerful wolves, good wolves, wolves who might have been interested if I'd had time to build something real. But there's no spark, no bond. Nothing that feels like what you described. Because you're thinking about it wrong," the whisper said gently, more gently than it had ever spoken before. "You're treating this like a hunt, like a mission. But mate bonds don't work that way. They're not about finding the strongest wolf or the most compatible personality. They're about recognition. About finding someone whose soul knows yours." "That's not helpful," Margeret said bitterly. How am I supposed to recognize someone's soul when I'm running out of time? By stopping, the whisper said simply. Stop running. Stop searching. Stop trying to force something that has to happen naturally. Margeret laughed, the sound harsh and broken. I have 2 days, whisper. If I stop now, Ethan dies. The pack might execute him just to send me a message. I can't. Margeret. The whisper's voice was sharp enough to cut through her spiral of panic. There's something I need to tell you. Something I've been avoiding. Margeret went very still. What? The mate bond you're looking for. You've already found it. Silence. Then, what are you talking about? The blacksmith, the whisper said quietly. Ethan. He's your mate. He always has been. You've known it since the moment he stood between you and the pack, since he offered to die beside you. Since he chose you and no one else would. The bond is there, Margeret. It's been forming since the moment you met. You just haven't acknowledged it. Margeret felt like she'd been struck by lightning. That's impossible, she whispered. We barely know each other. We've spent maybe a handful of hours together total. Mate bonds take time. Some do, the whisper agreed. Months or years of slow recognition. But others? They're instant. A single moment where 2 souls look at each other and just know. You and Ethan? You had that moment in Lily's cabin. You've been fighting it ever since because it seemed too convenient, too fairy tale, too good to be true after a lifetime of being told you were worthless. Margaret's hands clenched into fists, her claws digging into her palms. Could it be true? She thought back to that moment in the cabin, Ethan's presence, his scent of metal and pine, and something indefinably right. The way her heart had stuttered when he'd said he wanted to be on the right side. The way she'd trusted him instantly, completely, despite every lesson her life had taught her about trust. The way she'd felt when she'd walked away from him in the clearing, leaving him as Alpha Cade's prisoner. Like she was tearing out a piece of her own soul. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Margeret demanded, rage and hope warring in her chest. Because you weren't ready, the whisper said honestly. You were still too focused on vengeance, too consumed by pain. If I'd told you then, you would have rejected it. Thought it was manipulation or a trick. But now? After weeks of searching, after learning what you really want? Now you're ready to accept it. Margeret stood abruptly, her heart pounding. If he's my mate, then the bond should stabilize my power. Which means you need to complete the bond, the whisper finished. Return to Crescent Ridge. Claim your mate openly. Let the bond fully form, and your power will anchor itself. The curse will stop. The pack will see what you really are, not a monster, but a wolf who's finally found her place. Margeret didn't hesitate. She ran. Not away from Crescent Ridge this time, but toward it. Her enhanced senses guided her through the darkness, her feet finding purchase on terrain she couldn't see but could feel with perfect clarity. She had 2 days. She needed one. Margeret crossed into Crescent Ridge territory at dawn on the 30th day. She didn't hide this time. Didn't mask her presence or sneak through the shadows. She walked openly through the forest, letting every wolf in the territory feel her approach. Letting Alpha Cade know she'd kept her promise. The pack was waiting for her at the border, not the full fighting force this time, but a delegation. Alpha Cade stood at the center, flanked by Dane and Nathan. And behind them, bruised but alive, was Ethan. Margaret's heart lurched at the sight of him, or rather, at the sense of him. His presence called to something deep in her chest, like a melody she'd been waiting her whole life to hear. Mate, her soul whispered. Home. You came back, Cade said, surprise evident in his voice. I'll admit, I didn't think you would. I promised, Margeret said simply, her eyes, still blind, still glowing softly, finding Ethan unerringly across the distance. And I keep my promises. Did you find what you were looking for? Cade asked. A mate to stabilize your power? Yes, Margeret said, her voice steady and sure. I did. She walked past Cade, past Dane, past all of them, her focus entirely on Ethan. He met her halfway, his expression a mix of relief and something deeper, something that made her newly awakened heart race. "You came back," Ethan breathed, his hands reaching for hers, fingers intertwining. "I was afraid." "I know," Margaret interrupted. "But I couldn't leave you. Wouldn't leave you. Not when I finally understand what you are to me." Ethan's eyes widened. "Margaret." "You're my mate," she said clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You have been since the moment we met. I was just too broken, too afraid to see it. But I see it now. I feel it. And if you'll have me broken, cursed, blind as I am, I'd like to complete the bond. Properly." In front of witnesses. The assembled wolves gasped. Ethan stared at her, emotions warring across his face, shock, hope, fear, joy all blending together. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "Margaret, mate bonds are forever. And you barely know me. If this is just about stopping the curse." "It's not," Margaret said fiercely. She reached up, her hands finding his face, tracing features she couldn't see but knew in her soul. "I've spent 28 days searching for someone who could anchor my power. I met strong wolves, kind wolves, wolves who might have been perfect on paper. But none of them felt right. Because none of them were you." She paused, gathering courage. "You stood up for me when no one else would. You saw value in me when everyone else saw burden. You were willing to die beside me, and then willing to let me go so I could survive. You taught me that connection isn't about pack hierarchy or alpha commands. It's about choice. And I choose you, Ethan. If you'll choose me back." Silence stretched across the clearing. Then Ethan smiled, bright and real and full of everything Margaret had never dared to hope for. "I choose you," he said simply. "I've been choosing you since the moment I saw you standing in Lily's cabin, powerful and terrified and absolutely extraordinary. I choose you now, and I'll keep choosing you every day for the rest of our lives." He pulled her close, and Margaret felt it, the bond snapping into place like a key turning in a lock. It wasn't gentle. It was overwhelming, all-consuming, a rush of emotion and power and connection that took her breath away. She felt Ethan's soul brush against hers, steady and strong and loyal, with depths of kindness and courage she'd only glimpsed before. Felt his acceptance of everything she was, power and curse and brokenness and all. And through the bond, she felt her power stabilize. The wild, chaotic energy that had been poisoning pack bonds suddenly had an anchor. It wrapped around her connection to Ethan, drawing strength from their bond, transforming from curse to gift. Margaret gasped as her senses sharpened even further, but controlled now, precise. She could still feel pack bonds around her, could still sense the hierarchies and connections. But they weren't withering anymore. They were just there. Information, not infection. "It worked," she breathed, leaning into Ethan's embrace. "The curse is gone. I can feel it." Alpha Cade stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. "Prove it. Touch my bond. Show me you're no longer a threat." Margaret nodded, understanding the test for what it was. She reached out with her power controlled now, gentle, and brushed against Cade's connection to his pack. It held firm. No decay. No withering. Just a strong, healthy bond that flexed slightly under her touch, but didn't break. Cade's eyes widened. "I felt that. But it didn't hurt. Didn't damage anything. Because I'm anchored now," Margaret explained, turning to face him while keeping one hand firmly clasped in Ethan's. "The mate bond gave my power a purpose beyond destruction. I can still sense pack bonds, can still interact with them. But I'm no longer poisoning them just by existing." "And the damage you already caused?" Dane asked suspiciously. "The wolves who were affected?" "Should heal now that the source is contained," Margaret said. She reached out toward the pack, sensing the bonds she'd inadvertently damaged. With Ethan's presence strengthening her control, she carefully pushed, not severing, but mending. Reinforcing connections that had frayed, healing tears that had formed. It was exhausting, like stitching up a wound from the inside out. But slowly, gradually, she felt the pack's bond network stabilizing. Not perfect, some damage was too severe for instant healing, but improving. The young wolf who'd been dying 3 days ago stirred in his home, his bond suddenly stronger, the pain receding. Old Marcus, wandering in confusion, felt his connection to the pack snap back into place, bringing clarity and relief. Throughout Crescent Ridge territory, wolves gasped as they felt their bonds strengthen, the decay reversing, the curse lifting. "I don't believe it," Nathan whispered, awe in his voice. "She's actually healing them." "Not just healing," Margeret corrected, exhaustion making her lean heavily on Ethan. "Proving that power doesn't have to destroy. That being different doesn't make you dangerous. That pact can mean something more than hierarchy and fear." She looked directly at Alpha Cade, her blind eyes seeming to see straight through him. "You tried to kill me because I was inconvenient. Because I was different. Because you decided my life was worth less than your comfort. But I survived. I transformed. And I came back, not for revenge, but for redemption. For myself and for this pack." Cade was silent for a long moment. Then, to everyone's shock, the massive Alpha bowed his head. Not submission, Alphas didn't submit. But acknowledgement. Respect. "I was wrong," Cade said, each word clearly costing him. "About you. About your worth. About what you could become. You could have destroyed us all. Instead, you saved us. He paused, searching for words. "That's more than I deserve." "It's not about what you deserve," Margeret said quietly. "It's about what's right. And letting innocent wolves die because I'm angry? That's not right. Even if those wolves are part of the pack that tried to kill me." She felt Ethan squeeze her hand, pride and love flooding through their new bond. "I won't ask for an apology," Margeret continued, "because words are cheap. But I will ask for change. This pack needs to do better. Be better. Stop treating Omegas like burdens. Stop casting out anyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of strong. Build pack bonds on loyalty and choice, not just fear of the Alpha's authority." Cade was quiet, then nodded slowly. "That's fair. It won't happen overnight." "I know," Margeret interrupted. "Change takes time. But it has to start somewhere." "It will," Cade promised. Then, surprisingly, he turned to Ethan. "You're free to go, blacksmith. Your service as insurance is complete." And, he paused, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry. For how we treated your mother. For how we treated you. For making you feel like you didn't belong when you've done nothing but serve this pack faithfully." Ethan nodded, accepting the apology with quiet dignity. "Thank you, Alpha." Cade looked between Ethan and Margeret, something like understanding crossing his face. "What will you do now? Stay? Leave?" Margeret and Ethan exchanged a glance, communicating through their bond in ways that didn't require words. "Leave," Margeret said finally. "At least for a while. This pack holds too many painful memories. We need space to build our own life, to explore what this bond means. But we won't go far. And if Crescent Ridge ever needs us, truly needs us, we'll come back." "I understand," Cade said. Then, formally, "You are welcome in this territory, Margeret. You and your mate both. The exile is lifted. The judgment reversed. Your pack, if you choose to be." It was more than Margeret had ever thought she'd hear. More than she'd ever dreamed of receiving. But looking at it now, the acceptance, the acknowledgement, the grudging respect, she realized something profound. She didn't need their validation anymore. She had Ethan. She had her power, controlled and purposeful. She had a future full of possibilities instead of limitations. She had herself, whole and strong and worthy, regardless of what anyone else thought. "Thank you," Margeret said sincerely. "But I think we'll make our own pack. Small, maybe. Just the two of us for now. Built on choice and respect and the kind of bonds that can't be broken by convenience or cruelty." Ethan grinned beside her. "Sounds perfect." As they turned to leave, walking side by side toward the border and the future beyond, Margeret heard Lily's voice call out. "Margeret! Wait!" She stopped, sensing the Omega approaching nervously. I just wanted to say, Lily's voice cracked. I'm sorry. For laughing at you. For not speaking up. For being a coward when you needed a friend. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm sorry. Margeret considered this. A month ago, she would have raged at Lily, would have wanted her to suffer for every small cruelty, every moment of complicity. But now? Now she just felt tired. And free. I don't forgive you, Margeret said honestly. Not yet. Maybe someday. But Lily? You can do better. Be the friend you should have been. Speak up when others can't. Make sure no one else is ever treated the way you let me be treated. That's how you earn forgiveness, not by apologizing, but by changing. Lily nodded, tears streaming down her face. I will. I promise. Margeret nodded once, then continued walking with Ethan at her side. They crossed the border just as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the world in shades of gold that Margeret couldn't see but could feel, warm and bright and full of promise. Where should we go? Ethan asked, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of her hand. Anywhere, Margeret replied, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. Everywhere. As long as we're together, I don't care. The whisper stirred one last time, its voice fond and almost proud. You've done well, child. Your ancestors would be honored. And for what it's worth, so am I. Will you stay? Margeret asked silently. The whisper, the power, will it always be there? The power is yours now, fully integrated. And I'm just an echo of what came before. I'll fade eventually, once you no longer need my guidance. But until then, I'm here. Thank you, Margeret said softly. For answering when I called. For showing me what I could become. Thank you, the whisper replied, for proving that power doesn't have to corrupt. That even in darkness, there can be light. Now go, Margeret. Live. Love. Build the life you deserve. And she did. Margeret and Ethan traveled for months, exploring territories and meeting wolves from dozens of different packs. They settled eventually in neutral ground, building a small cabin near a clear stream where the forest was thick and the stars were bright. They became known as the bonded pair, wolves who helped mediate disputes between packs, who taught young wolves about the importance of consent and choice in pack bonds, who proved that strength came in many forms. Other outcasts found them. Wolves who'd been rejected by their packs for being different, for being weak, for not fitting in. Margeret and Ethan welcomed them all, building a new kind of pack, small but fierce, based on loyalty freely given rather than hierarchy enforced. And sometimes, late at night, Margeret would sit outside their cabin and reach out with her senses, feeling the vast network of pack bonds stretching across the land. She could have severed them, could have brought chaos and destruction to every pack that had ever rejected someone like her. But she didn't. Because she'd learned the most important lesson of all. True power wasn't about destruction. It was about choice. About building connections instead of breaking them. About proving that even the blind, broken Omega everyone had dismissed could become something extraordinary, not through vengeance, but through love. And as Ethan emerged from the cabin, wrapping his arms around her and pulling her close, Margeret knew with absolute certainty. She was exactly where she belonged. Finally. Completely. Home. And there you have it, beautiful souls. Margaret's journey from abandoned Omega to powerful force of change, from broken and blind to whole and purposeful. She didn't just survive, she thrived. And she did it without losing her humanity, without becoming the monster everyone feared. What did you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing your reactions. Did Ethan and Margaret's love story give you all the feels? Were you satisfied with how Alpha Cade and the pack were handled? Let me know. And if you enjoyed the story, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I have so many more werewolf romance stories coming your way, and you don't want to miss a single one. Share this video with your friends who love shifter romance. They'll thank you for it. Until next time, remember, you are never defined by how others see you. Your worth is inherent, your power is yours alone, and your story is just beginning. Stay strong, stay fierce, and keep believing in magic. I'll see you in the next one.